Hello, this is my presentation on cellular signaling. My name is Alexandra de la Cruz, and the goal of this presentation is to learn more in depth about cellular signaling pathways and the angiotensin II subtype 2 receptor and its role on cardiovascular physiology. So starting with this image here, this is the signaling pathway of the angiotensin II subtype 2 receptor, also known as AT2R for short, and this is the pathway in vasodilation. So I will discuss what's happening here. So in this image, the B2 stands for B2 receptors, the GX stands for G proteins, NO stands for nitric oxide, and CGMP stands for 3' 5' cycling guanosine monophosphate. So now to discuss what's happening in this image, the AT2 receptor, which is right there on top, and the B2 receptors will overall form a stable functional heterodimer. This will then lead to an increased levels of nitric oxide on the CGMP production. So as you can see right there in the middle with the red box is my nitric oxide, and it's in high levels. This will overall, the high levels of the nitric oxide and the CGMP production will overall lead to high levels of vasodilation. So furthermore, the AT2R expression will be lower than the expression of the AT1R. This will overall include or induce start up the induction of the angiotensin II receptor, and this will overall result in the endothelial AT2R, and this will cause vasodilations. As you can see right there in the bottom, high levels of nitric oxide, CGMP, will lead to overall vasodilation. So that is kind of what's happening here, and that's kind of the signaling pathways. And the B2 receptors, the GX, nitric oxide, and the CGMP are all key players in this process. So now to talk about this process here, this is the B-andrenic receptor pathway leading into glycolysis. So glycolysis will be the overall end result. And so what's happening here is that the epinephrine will bind to its specific receptor, B-andrenic receptor. As you can see, that's what's happening at the top. And then the hormone receptor will complex cause the GDP and bound to its GX. This will then be released by the GTP, activating GSX. So that's what's happening on the second one. The activated GSX will separate from the GSB and move to the overall cyclase, and it will activate it. Many of the GSX will be subunits, and they may be activated by one occupied receptor. Fourthly, the adenylyl cyclase will catalyze the formation of the CAMP. The CAMP will activate pKa, and the phosphorylation of the cellular protein by pKa will cause the cellular response to epinephrine. So that is the main point right here, is that the phosphorylation cellular protein by pKa will cause a cellular response to epinephrine. Seventh step is that the CAMP will be degraded, and it will reverse the activation of pKa. The last step, what's happening right there, is that the active pKa will activate the phosphorylase B kinase, which will then activate the glycogen phosphorylase, and this will convert glycogen to glucose 1-phosphate, and the glucose 1-phosphate will overall convert to glucose. So that is what's happening step by step from step 1 all the way to your main result, which will be the blood glucose. It's important to know that the molecules are important, and as you're going down your process, you're needing more and more and more. And overall, right here in your bottom, you have your glucose. So now to discuss how SARS-CoV-2 interferes with the signaling pathway and infects lung cells. So I want you to go over these bullet points. First, epinephrine will bind to a specific receptor. That is main key, and that is how it interferes, is by that binding. Secondly, CAMP will be degraded, and this will then reverse the activation of pKa. And it's also important to know that lung cells are the primary target of the SARS-CoV-2, and because of this, we have patients, of course, with pneumonia, respiratory diseases, and more, or even sadly getting intubated because the respiratory system is down. So SARS-CoV SARS-CoV-2 interferes in signaling pathways of lung cells. This is because the SARS-CoV-2 converting enzyme, also known as ACE2, as a receptor will enter the host cell, and that is where the magic happens. That is where it attacks, and that is where it takes advantage, and it'll overall bind to that specific receptor. And that is how it interferes with the signaling pathway because of CAMP and the specific receptors. And these are my sources. Thank you.